Welcome back to the Scale Forward podcast. Today, I'm joined by John, who is the CEO of Vero Technologies. Vero is bringing tech solutions to the asset financing space with a SaaS platform born from a wild journey. John, it's a unique story we were chatting earlier before, but it may cause founders and CEOs how to rethink and pivot and grow as a founder. Let's jump right on in. And I want to ask you, like I said, it's a crazy story that you didn't just start a SaaS company. You launched a finance company as your first client for the SaaS. Do you want to break that down for me? What sparked that move? And of course, introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Thanks again for having me, Russell. John Mizzi here, the CEO and one of the co-founders at Vero. So what we've done or how we got started, going back, this was in the midst of COVID in 2020. It was really important to me that we have a design partner, an actual operator in the industry who could help drive the early iterations of our product roadmap. I had some scars from a prior role where we built some great tech, but we didn't necessarily have that feedback loop and ultimately had gaps in how we approached, solving certain problems. So with Vero, we'd gone out into the market. We had talked to a lot of lenders, done extensive customer discovery, but ultimately couldn't find anyone who was willing to commit resources to being that design development partner for us. And so that led us to actually start our own finance company and position that group to be the first client of our technology organization.
Kicking off in 2020 obviously has its challenges. Before we get into those, do you just want to break down where you're at now? Who's Vero serving and who's your ideal clients? What's your customers look like? Where you're at, if you want to talk about revenue or raise, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're, nearly 5 years into this journey. We did our Series A in 2023, led by Bank Tech Ventures, which is an interesting group that, while they're a VC, we view them very much as a strategic investor. All of their LPs are actually banks. We have, a pretty interesting mix of investors. I can get into that later in the conversation. As far as where we're at today, we came to an interesting crossroads in 2024 where we really had to make a decision, were we going to continue running both the financing platform as well as the software business? And really the decisioning factor came down to the reality that in order to continue scaling our financing business, we were going to have to go out and raise, upwards of $10 million in order to get another credit facility, maintain the financial covenants of that credit facility. And we recognized that was going to be really dilutive to the overall enterprise. And coinciding with that, we, finally, after a lot of grinding and a lot of doors being shut in our face, found our sweet spot as far as, clientele in the SaaS side of the house. And so we came to the conclusion, albeit a difficult one, where we've decided to really move away from what we call direct lending and really focus exclusively on our software and services business. As far as the types of customers that we support, it's a mix of small and medium-sized banks and independent finance companies today. We actually just signed our first international deal with a group based out of Australia. So very excited about that.
Sweet.
Yes. Hopefully I get an excuse to get over to Oz soon.
Yes.
With that said, to define exactly the space that we play in, we got started working exclusively with groups that provide wholesale or floor plan financing. Happy to explain what that is, but
Please.
In any case, we've since found use cases in tangential markets. So today we have customers that cover wholesale, supply chain and trade financing, as well as equipment financing. And so we kind of have, you can zoom out a little bit, and really our domain is the asset financing space. Just circle back, but to describe what floor plan financing is, you guys, everyone drives by the car dealer or the tractor dealership, in whatever towns they've grown up in. And those dealers are carrying millions of dollars of inventory. And I think, everyone kind of assumes, the dealers, buying the inventory from a manufacturer and then selling it at a premium, and that's how they make their money. But typically dealers don't have the capital to fund inventory acquisition. And so floor plan financing is actually the kind of last leg of the supply chain finance vertical, where the lender is financing the manufacturer on behalf of a dealer to fund inventory acquisition. They originate a receivable. The dealer is the borrower here. And then when the dealer sells that car to you or me as their end customer, they pay off the lender principal and interest and just recycle that money and acquire more inventory in order to keep their lots full. So it's a kind of unique credit structure or instrument that it looks like a revolving line of credit, but there's a lot more complexity due to the reality that these cars are only sitting on a dealer's lot for 30 to 90 days. However, that is the collateral against the loan. And so as a lender, you need to have a lot of systems in place to manage your collateral effectively.
Right. Okay. Thanks for breaking that down. Makes sense. There's a couple of things there. Obviously, you kicked off in a very difficult time. Took you a while to get rolling. I think in our previous conversation, you said first 18 months were fun. You had some quick wins. Can you remember what those early victories were, and then touch on that? And then obviously looking back where you are now, what is perhaps one thing that you would tell a founder to help identify an early win?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. The earliest win that I remember, we went through a venture program that's sponsored by the VC fund Antler, global platform. They really get in early and almost, they write almost exclusively pre-seed checks, at least out of they have a pre-seed fund, and they've since launched a later stage fund to support their portco's growth. But I remember the earliest was simply, this was an idea I had from a prior client engagement. And frankly, I went into the program with kind of a kill your darlings mentality of there's got to be a better idea out there for us to pursue. Lo and behold, we had 80 customer discovery conversations over the course of about 10 weeks and really found that this was a market that was always an afterthought. There hadn't been much innovation. There really hadn't been anyone who was driving technology initiatives in terms of filling in the gaps that we were thinking about. And so the first validation was simply to kind of hear some, career industry folks say, this is a problem that needs to get solved. The next one I remember vividly was within 6 months of incorporating, we originated our first loan. And so this was the most important thing to me, that as we were driving our product forward, I wanted to have transactions and cash flowing through our pipes. And so for us to be able to originate a loan within 6 months felt like we were well on our way to being able to have that feedback loop.
Is that normal? Do you hear about that type of speed in the industry?
It's funny. We now support some folks today that have taken 2 or 3 times that long to get off the ground,
right,
and they've operated in this space their entire lives. Now, I'll say we probably originated that first loan with a lot of half-baked systems and policies and procedures in place. And so there's something to be said about being a little more thoughtful out of the gates and moving a little slower and, crawling before you walk and walking before you run. But
right,
for us, obviously, capital and time were our most limited resources. And so we needed to move quickly. Now, in hindsight, ultimately, for those first 18 months, we knew that we didn't have a software product to sell. We originated that first loan with a jot form and an Excel spreadsheet. And so those first 18 months were fun because we were able to garner some great insights in terms of what product requirements and kind of innovative ways to solve problems that folks in the industry had raised for us. But at the same time, we didn't have the pressure of needing market validation in terms of we're not closing any software deals because we simply didn't have a sell. So it's kind of setting the right expectations around knowing, like, for the infancy, this is all we needed to do. And we were doing what we needed to do very effectively. I think the challenge came, in early 2023 when we had a product that was ready to go to market. And unfortunately, we were coinciding with, since the GFC, the closest thing to a financial crisis, at least in the banking sector, with the fall of Silicon Valley Bank and the others here in the United States.
Yeah, well, that was going to be a part of further down the line of the conversation. I was going to ask that question, but you said you got to walk before you run. I imagine you say that because you had perhaps maybe an oh shit moment. Is there one that sticks out that maybe some other people would get some lessons from?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, and this was a hard lesson to learn, but there's always going to be factors that are totally outside of your control. For us, we went 18 months where we had a portfolio of dealers. We were lending money. It was like we could do no wrong. Looking back, hindsight's always 2020. Ironically, in 2020 through 2022, it was the first time in the auto dealer market here in the United States, and it's the first time in history where cars were appreciating in value.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I'm a car guy. I remember this. Yeah.
It was insane. So,
COVID
all of our
prices, if we can say that word.
Exactly. all of our dealer customers were making hand over fist. So there was never going to be credit issues. And then as interest rates started to increase and we went through this inflationary cycle in the back half of 2022, it's like, the whatever the Buffett quote is, when the tide goes out, you see who's wearing shorts. And a lot of our guys were not wearing shorts. And so we had a few dealer defaults, which, talk about getting punched in the face and seeing how you react when someone goes out of business and owes you tens of thousands of dollars and you need to go try to collect. Then you got to write a few more playbooks on the fly.
Right. Okay. And at this point, you're still running the finance predominantly. And then I want to touch on, so at one point you're running two businesses, right? The finance, and then you started the software. And as we said at the top of the show, the finance company became your software's first client. Can you walk us through that?
We came to this conclusion, like I mentioned, where continuing to scale the direct lending business was going to be very capital intensive. And so, we had invested so much blood, sweat, and tears into the direct lending because, as I mentioned, we wanted to start commercializing our software in 2023. Really tough year to start selling software into banks and finance companies. Everyone is looking to cut costs wherever they can. No one's trying to make investments or, roll the dice on being the first or second customer of a new enterprise fintech company. And so, in 2023, we kind of were like, we don't have a software business right now to hang our hat on. So we need to keep growing our direct lending business because at least the direct lending business is generating, significant revenues. When we came to the, harsh reality that we couldn't scale the direct lending without going out to raise a bunch of equity. And, the equity markets, the venture equity markets they don't look on balance sheet lending fintechs with a very favorable lens, especially if you're lending against, hard asset collateral. So we really realized in order to be investable, in order for us to survive, we needed to have traction for our SaaS business. And so in 2024, we had one software client at this point that we had gone live with in the middle of 23. I think the reality and what we learned after the fact is you can only do so many things at once. You have limited resources, limited capacity, and it's extra difficult to try to push on growth for your software business when you're running a direct lending business, because every time that a borrower does default or there is a credit issue or you need to go more capital to fund your growing portfolio, ultimately you have to stop what you're doing on the software side of the business and put all of your efforts behind your direct lending business because that's generating revenue. And so that becomes the first priority. And so what was really validating is we made this hard decision to stop growing our direct lending business and even start, winding down a portion of it in the middle of 2024. And as soon as we made that decision and really, reoriented some folks, and that was another challenge where we had to ask folks who had put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into driving direct lending we had to do a layoff, which is really difficult. It was the hardest decision we had to make. And then we had to ask folks who had invested a lot of energy into driving direct lending to say, hey, we're not doing that anymore. And we need you guys to focus your efforts on SaaS instead. Folks were frustrated, so being able to manage, a team and help on an individualized basis, help folks understand this is why we're making these decisions. This is why we need you to do what you're doing. We know that we're asking a lot is an understatement. But lo and behold, within 3 months of making that decision, we started having a lot of traction with our SaaS business. We closed 4 deals in the fourth quarter, and we, have a growing number of great opportunities in our pipeline, and we've really found our sweet spot.
Yeah, this again, we'll touch on them later, but there's some challenges there that we'll cover with the layoffs and stuff, because that's a incredibly hard decision. And I can't downplay how that must feel because of the responsibility that what you're cutting loose. So we'll talk about that later. But you mentioned one thing you mentioned there is how do you get people to trust you, first or second client or customer? How did you go about doing that?
We tried a lot of different things. We were fortunate with our first customer. They had a relatively, I don't want to use the word basic, but they had a set of requirements that we could knock out of the park. And so it was kind of like catching lightning in a bottle, but We met them through BankTech Ventures. We were able to build a relationship with them. We were able to deliver on their needs, and it was really a home run. So, having that validation was great. And look, I think everyone who's building an enterprise software business, they want the $1 million contracts. They want the big logo deals. But the reality is, we knew if we went for Ford Motor Credit or GM Financial, Wells Fargo, or Huntington Bank, we would die on the hill of managing that sales cycle. And so we went after smaller organizations that were playing in the space. We did smaller deals from a revenue standpoint. We made more concessions in terms of, a lot of what we did build some custom stuff for our first set of clients. In some cases, it was great because we learned about how they manage their business, and that led to product insights that we can deploy across the rest of our client population. In other cases, we built shit because we know it was going to make them happy, and we were really appreciative for them giving us a shot, and we wanted them to become advocates and cheerleaders for us. Yeah. And so, you got to navigate what you're willing to build that maybe is custom versus what is, part of the product roadmap. A buddy just shared this quote from a more legendary CEO in the SaaS business, and it's, he's like, "Are we getting paid?" He went to his product team who was working on something cool, and he's like, "Are we getting paid to build that?" And the product guys are like, "What do you mean?" He's like, could we get sued if we don't build that feature?" And they said, well, no, but like, we know that it would make the client really happy. And he's like, if we're not going to get sued, we're not building it. And so, I don't quite have that mentality. I think we have some really great ideas that are going to make a client smile and make their life meaningfully easier. We should sprinkle in a few of those into our product roadmap because that's just building a lot of goodwill. And we like to say we want our clients to think of us as an extension of their IT organization. What are the, what feedback do they have? What are the gaps that we have in our system? What are the little, bells and whistles? Or can we move a button from the bottom left to the top right, and it's going to make a meaningful difference in how they interact with the interfaces or systems that we've built? Because I think that's just a good way to build relationships with your software clients. But with that said, those early customers, we jumped through some hoops to really get them comfortable and invest in these relationships. And I think now we finally can say we have product market fit, which 12 months ago we couldn't say. And we know, how to meet the needs of the clients that we're going after. And we know most importantly, we know how to sell. It took us 2 years of a lot of reflection and refining to figure out, what is the sales process here? How do we effectively manage a sales cycle given the complexity of what we're trying to integrate and implement into our client's business?
You touched on a couple of next questions that I had, which like, what's the trick of building a product that people like? And I think you kind of nailed on that. It's just, you don't know until you talk to these people and you ask them, and then you try and build it. And then you said the infamous quote, which seemed to work like a charm. Let's talk about the raise then, because early challenges, you got some wins under the belt, you got some clients. You're now at a Series A in 2023. I can say the number, right? It's everywhere anyway. Yeah, so raised 12.5 million. Amazing.
We raised 12.5 total. We did 7.5 for our Series A and had raised 5.
Right. So total 12.5. Are we mentioning if we're profitable or not yet?
Not yet profitable. We've got a path, and I will say we're not a grow at all costs mentality. And I think that we can dig in on that topic.
Let's do it. So how do you keep the runway extending without doing more raises or whatever it is? And how do you keep the team motivated? You touched on that lightly. You have a really solid team. How do you keep progressing, I guess, and continue to extend your timeline whilst growing and getting profitable?
Yeah. In terms of capital efficiency, we ask a lot of our people. And frankly, I think that any startup is resource constrained.
Like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk type level, or just
No, we don't have anyone needing to sleep under their desk. And
okay, fair enough.
I try not to, blow up on people for asking good questions or anything Steve Jobs oriented. But in any case, I actually think part of our success is that we have a super solid core team that, half of them have come from asset financing backgrounds. We have folks that have come from, auto auction backgrounds. And so they know the dynamics of how dealers operate, how lenders operate, how the wholesaling channel works. And then, our CTO and myself come from, banking backgrounds. Rama was at Silicon Valley Bank for, I believe, the better part of a decade. I should know that, but, he knows banking systems work and how to create and manage, deployments in that ecosystem. So we have a really diverse set of backgrounds. My co-founder, Isaac, had successfully exited from his last company that he had founded, where they developed software to improve the GPS for autonomous vehicles. So he operated in the auto space, albeit from a very different vector. So anyways, I think diversity of perspectives, but frankly, having a lot of folks that came from the industry that we're serving in the room. Obviously, most of those folks were staffed on our direct lending business, but also were the source of many of our best product ideas. But in terms of, keeping people motivated, I think if I look back, the big shift we went through was growing from like 8 people to 16 people. Because when it was 8 people, everyone could be in the room for just about every conversation. Everyone knew what was going on in every corner of the organization, and communication was relatively easy. When you get to 16, you need to implement some level of, a management system. Everyone can't keep reporting to Isaac or me. You need to be able to, I remember coming to this conclusion. I used to hate when people would say, stay in your lane, or like, we need silos in order to get shit done. And I remember coming to this conclusion where I was like, look, I need for some limited degree of silos, or like, I need you to stay in your lane. And so it was this like culture shift where I then explained why I was asking people to stay in their lane for the first time. And I remember, the way, and this came from, I don't know if it was a book I read or a talk, a podcast or what, but it was this reality where you needed your team to trust each other. Someone on customer success was never going to know all the factors that went into a decision that our risk department made, but they needed to trust that risk with the information that everyone's looking at the same population of information, or pool of information. So the risk team was going to make a decision for the best interest of the business from a risk perspective. And customer success, they didn't need to explain every decision they made to customer success, and vice versa. Customer success was going to go above and beyond for delivering for our clients, and they didn't need to explain why they did that to our risk department. We didn't have to have a conversation about every decision that got made. And then, I think the other framework that seems to work well is, I like to say, look, is this a $100 decision, a $1,000 decision, or a $10,000 decision? If it's a $100 decision, I want you to make that decision, and I don't want to know about it. I don't have time to. If it's a $1,000 decision, make the decision, and you could tell me about it after you make it. And if it's a $10,000 decision, let's have a chat. Let's make the decision together, or at least come to me and tell me what decision you would recommend making, and at least keep me in the loop to make sure that it doesn't conflict with anything going on in the other silos across the organization. And so I think some of those like relatively light-lived frameworks went a long way in terms of just helping reorient folks. And today, as far as keeping people motivated, it is, frankly, like in my opinion, we have asked our team to really go through a gauntlet the last 8 months, especially as we've kind of moved away from direct lending and really reoriented towards exclusively SaaS. And I think if we didn't have the wins that we've had over the last 6 months, I would be miserable. And I imagine my team would be miserable too. But also helping paint the picture for them of, we all know where we're coming from, and this is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get there. And these are very soft timetables. And so, just be patient with us if you can.
So you doubled your team. In what time period did you go from 8 to 16?
It was probably about 12 months.
Okay.
But it was, so it wasn't overnight, but it was even, 7 or 8 months. But it was a period where a lot was going on. We didn't have time to necessarily sit and talk with everyone in the way that I would have liked to. We probably were a little bit more reactive in addressing some of the friction that created instead of proactive. It's just the reality of running a startup. I think if I had an extra, 20% capacity to be thoughtful on a weekly basis, there's a lot of issues that we maybe created that would have been avoidable if I just could have been a little bit more thoughtful in terms of how we were going to approach, running a process.
It's growing pains though, isn't it? Are these employees, are they all in-house at the moment? Are you looking to do remote at some stage? I mean, many
So we
startups go
actually
remote.
have a fully offshore development organization. Um, my CTO and his kind of core team sit in Scottsdale, Arizona, but we have upwards of 30 engineers in an office in Hyderabad that we've set up. I think when we got started, we never really thought that we would have a permanent offshore operation. With that said, it speaks to Rama's expertise. Rama's our CTO. He had experience working with offshore teams. He had a, relationship to lean on to help us get rolling with this Hyderabad operation. And ultimately, you wouldn't know the difference. The velocity at which we can build things and the efficiency at which we can build things is second to none. I mean, I've been part of a few different technology organizations, and Rama is highly effective at managing, our DevOps operations, and his team overseas in a way that it's been the best investment we could have ever made.
Yeah, I mean, also like the advancements of internal tools and AI. You have these meetings, and you get a beautifully delivered summary on your desk on Monday morning, and it just keeps remote.
It's hilarious.
Teams rolling.
I get to Fridays, and my brain is fried. I need to look back and remember what were the commitments I made in a meeting on Tuesday, and my meeting summary there with all of my deliverables outlined is an absolute lifesaver.
Yeah, my missus is so thankful because before AI, it was that. It was like, hey, can you remember?
That's actually a good idea, Russell. I think I might need to
No,
start.
it's not. It's not a good idea.
Conversations with my fiance.
It's not a good idea at all. During that time that you added a lot of people to the business, it was also, and you mentioned it, a banking crisis, a mini banking crisis between 2022 and 23. From a previous conversation, you're saying people's credits were getting locked up. That you obviously flipped the script to the SaaS. What was it like going through that slog personally as a founder? What are some of the lessons you learned, and what ultimately got you out the other side?
Got a lot less hair today, and the hair that I have is grayer as a result. I know we talked about that before.
We did. Yeah.
It was rough. I mean, I felt like every week we showed up and just got punched in the stomach by someone else.
Which takes a lot of grit to keep going. So,
yeah. I mean, I think
it's a personal thing or just an experience?
At that point, we had 18 people that we cared about working with us, and we had invested, nearly 3 years in building at that point. We were going in to do this Series A raise, which was a stressful effort to say the least. And at some point, I think this was another good, I've spent a lot of years, working with a therapist, working with an executive coach. And I like to think I've built somewhat of a tool belt to deal with these challenging times. But one of the biggest, the mantra that I held on to was, it's not going to last forever. Something's going to shift. And whether that means, we don't make it to the other side, or, something shifts for the positive, this shitty, pardon my language, era is not going to go on forever. And so I just had to hold on to that and keep showing up and keep chopping wood and keep dealing with problems and put everything I had into it. And look, during that phase, by Friday afternoon, poured myself a drink and I said, we got through another week and I've got days to rest and reflect, and I got to get back to it on Monday. And that was it.
Yeah.
You just, your nose down and power through is the only answer there.
Switching gears, and I'll try and keep this as positive. Maybe you can highlight some of the positives or lessons learned. I know you have a really great team, but to get that team, you had to do some layoffs because of difficulties. Super tough, super hard to make those decisions. Are you able to break that down, maybe shed some insights and experience on that? Maybe somebody's in a similar position, and how
absolutely.
do they decide who it?
I mean, I'll start with the dark side and get to the light side, but we had built out a sales organization for our direct lending business. We had hired 5 new people literally 8 weeks earlier. And a lot of this, we were in the midst of this refinancing and came to these harsh conclusions and, basically got to a point where the writing was on the wall. We had to do this. And so, the rationale is, look, we were at about 25 people at that point, 26, and we ended up laying off 8. The reality was, in order to protect the other 18 who would still be here, we needed to lay off the 8. And so, the ends justify the means, I guess. But the reality was, it was not an easy decision to come to. In order to make the decision, we recognized that it was simply the only way through. And so we did the layoff. But the one thing that we did that I think if you're going to do a layoff, you need to recognize that you're impacting a bunch of innocent people's lives who have showed up and tried to do their best to deliver for you every day. It's one thing if you're laying off, underperformers, but this was just our entire sales and credit function for the direct lending business. It was just people that didn't have a job in our future state. And so we helped, to the extent possible, every one of those people find a new home. We made phone calls, we sent out resumes, we did reference calls, we found job boards and sent them to the people that were impacted. So we had 3 or 4 folks who got very involved in helping facilitate smooth transitions for the folks that were part of the RIF, and ultimately help, several of those folks. We sourced those new roles. And I don't want to take credit for it. I don't want to act as if that's, our contrition and it's not it makes everything okay, but it was the best thing that we could do for those folks that got impacted. And I'm glad that we spent some time and resources doing it.
Yeah. I imagine one of the hardest, if not the hardest decisions you'd have to make as a founder CEO, and hopefully one that nobody has to find themselves in, and hopefully you never do again. That's for sure.
Knock on wood.
Done. Switching gears, we spoke about how do you build trust. You went through some ups and downs and you tested a bunch of stuff for finding customers, finding your voice in marketing. What were some of the things you tested? What were some of the avenues you went down? And you said to me previously that most of them flopped. What were they? And can you tell me why you think that? And then what's one growth hack you're exploring at the moment that you think will work for you moving forward?
Yeah. I think we tried just about everything. Email campaigns, content marketing, a lot of cold calling, LinkedIn outreach, LinkedIn outreach, I find like I said, we did about 80 customer discovery calls when we were getting, and it's really, people are pretty cool in terms of their interest in paying it forward or just having a good chat about what their experiences are and what wisdom they can share. And so I guess my one recommendation is use LinkedIn for customer discovery all day long, especially if you're just getting started. And you can reach out and you can stroke someone's ego a bit and explain, hey, you look like you've been an operator in this space and been very successful, and we're trying to do X, Y, or Z. And I would love to just pick your brain and understand, is this a problem that you think needs to be solved? And we had a lot of great conversations that helped us zero in on what was the problem that needed to be solved. And frankly, that's how we've also found many of our best teammates who have joined us, is those customer discovery conversations translated into folks that said, I want to come be a part of this in some cases. And so LinkedIn proved to be good for customer discovery, but you can't just send generic sales oriented emails because no one has time for that. Ultimately, where we found the most success and we continue to double down is really, you got to go to the industry events. Year 1, year 2, year 3, you're still the new guy. No one gives a shit about you. Year 4, they're like, oh, you're still here. You've made some relationships. Oh, you've got some stories to tell. Like, okay, you're a little more interesting now than you used to be. Like, let's sit and have a chat. The other one that is invaluable is investing in relationships with folks that are connectors. And so, we have been fortunate to, build relationships and even partnerships with folks that, maybe they're selling a different product into the same, ICP or target customer population. And, you guys see each other, everyone has booths at these things. You bump into them year after year after year. And there's never going to be really an opportunity to work together directly, but they're talking to their customers about what problems they have. And everyone wants to solve problems for their customers, even if it's not, an internal solution. And so we've gotten a lot of great partners who make referrals for us simply because we have a good relationship with them. And, we also try to send them opportunities or plug them in places where we hear about someone having a problem that they could solve. And so it goes both ways. It can't be a one-sided, one-way street, but those referral partners become, hugely big lifts, especially as you're navigating, it's a massive market. There's a relatively small number of players. And so it becomes a pretty small community of folks that play in our industry. And so, and it's a revolving door of folks that jump from one organization to another. So you're able to kind of build out your network. And that is the best way for, we don't have the we have 16 people today. I don't have eyes and ears everywhere. I don't have a sales team that's just, calling on industry folks and having check-in conversations to see what's going on, periodically. And so the best way to get insights on when someone has a problem that they're trying to find a solution for is have eyes and ears at other organizations who know who you are and what you do and can plug you in if they find an opportunity to do so. And so really, we're trying to kind of formalize that in a way where, I want to bring all of our partners, even if there's not a formal partnership, but I want to bring them all together and, do a summit where everyone can kind of talk about what they're working on, what problems they're solving or they're focused on right now, what they're hearing from their prospects in the pipeline or current clients that someone else could solve, and kind of create just a friendly group that is thinking about these things. The other thing that we have in the works that I'm really excited about is, like most verticals in the finance world, you walk into these conferences and my team is some of the youngest folks there. It's a lot of old white guys who have been working in the industry for decades. And, that's just the way it is. Now, the reality is, especially with an enterprise software solution, is implementing a new system causes a lot of brain damage. Pulling out your existing system causes a heck of a lot of brain damage. Running that change management process to get, adopting your processes and systems based on the new technology and what, there's a lot to be gained, but there's also a lot to be adjusted relative to how you do things. It's a heavy lift. And so my view is a lot of folks that have been in these leadership roles for the better part of a decade, they're not motivated to take on a project that it's high risk, high reward. We de-risk it and we make sure that it's going to be a success, but there's always factors outside of, our influence that could come into play. And so we're really focused on building out what we call kind of the next generation. And we're going to do a summit here this fall that brings together the next generation of industry leaders across the market. It is not a sales conference. We are going to bring in speakers to talk about the challenges that we all are navigating as business leaders. How do you think about hiring the next generation that's coming out of college that is super tech enabled? How do you think about, building scalable processes and systems that create a culture of innovation? How do you think about dealing with the realities of new distribution models amongst your dealers? And what impact does that have from a credit standpoint? I don't think there's enough opportunity for folks in our industry to necessarily come together and have candid conversations with one another, especially if they work at competing organizations. So I'm excited to bring folks together and just, again, it's kind of like we want to build out a community of folks that understand the value in the broader mission, which is let's bring technology solutions to these archaic organizations and allow their people to focus on more high value responsibilities.
Interesting. Okay. So you have a summit coming up. We'll touch on that in the end and I'll get the details and make sure that people can get that. Boots on ground events, pretty old school. Emails and everything flopped. I'm hearing that a lot lately. I think everyone's kind of been there, done that. But I do know I have a hunch or a feeling that the listener would say, well, that's all great for you. You've raised millions of dollars. So fair enough. But what do you think is the best when you haven't raised? Do we need, because you also still need to be, brand awareness, pumping out some content here and there.
Yeah.
What do you have a hunch on what you would do there if you didn't have any funding?
My take is if you don't have funding and you don't have clients, you don't have a product. The best thing you can do is go get in front of people and have conversations. And the only way you're going to be able to do that, use LinkedIn, ask for advice, have customer discovery conversations. Hopefully, if God willing, we have a successful exit someday. And if I have to do this again with another idea or concept, I'm not going to start my own finance company. I'm not going to start my own first client of our software business. There was a lot of, I don't want to say wasted time and energy, but there was a more efficient way to achieve that outcome, in my opinion. Find a design development partner, find someone who you can solve a very narrow issue for. In hindsight, we had a vision for a platform play that we're fortunate through a lot of time and effort we've realized, but there also were more narrow use cases that we could have built out solutions to support in order to get traction earlier on. And so, my next company would not just be, let's go for the platform. It is, how do we solve more narrow use cases and ultimately put together a platform that is comprised of some smaller products that fill smaller needs for customers, because it's a heck of a lot easier to adopt a solution for your title management department or your underwriting department that is 5 to 10% of your organization's headcount, rather than try to roll out and sell a platform that requires adoption amongst 60 to 70% of your organization's headcount.
You mentioned an exit, which tells me that you're thinking of the future. Do you have a timeline for that? So first of all, two-part question. Where do you think the future in the next 3 to 5 or however long the prediction is in your space is gearing up towards? Is any new technology, let's say AI, going to have an impact on that? Then lead us up to or walk us through to the lead up to an exit. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm a little bearish on broad adoption of AI in our space. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely narrow use cases that it's going to support. I think in terms of customer support and communications, great use case. Yeah. I think even we get inbound inquiries from dealers and lenders all the time, and I think there's a lot of problem solving or just general customer success functionality that AI can handle. Frontline support. I think that AI will streamline the underwriting process, but in commercial lending, when you're thinking about underwriting $1 million or $5 million or $10 million line of credit, no one's going to trust an AI black box to make that decision. It's, there's this concept of the 5 C's, and the biggest one in my mind is character. And I don't think that AI is going to be able to make a character assessment or build that chip in the near term. I hope I'm eating my words someday when it comes to that stuff. I think there's a lot in terms of optimizing how documents get processed that AI will impact in the next 5 years. I think there's a lot in terms of how transactions get processed that AI will be able to drive in the next 5 years from a funding and origination standpoint. So I do think there's some great use cases. I don't know. We are not making big R&D investments on that quite yet. I would rather not be a first mover in that space. So with that said, I think there's definitely going to be opportunities. It's going to be something that we probably focus on more in 2026, 2027.
5 years in, less hair for you and I. More gray hairs in the beard, which means we should be a little bit wiser. Can you leave us with, it doesn't have to be that profound, but a piece of advice that you would want a young founder to hear in today's world on creating a startup?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I got to a point where I couldn't not do it. There wasn't another outcome career-wise that was going to do it for me. If I didn't do it, I would always wonder what if. If you're going to do it, you need to be all in. And you're never going to be fully prepared to do it. And once you do it, there's no real turning back on it. Especially the more money you raise and the more investors you get involved and the more people you hire. So, I think create space to be thoughtful and reflective before you make the decision. But once you do it, I mean, it's fun, it's rewarding, it's stressful. Even during the worst days of 22 and 23, I still woke up and could look myself in the mirror and say, I don't know what else I'd rather be doing right now.
Well, there we go. Well, John, thank you. It's been amazing. Some great insights. And do you just want to let people know where they can find out more about Vero and maybe touch on that event? Do you have a date for the summit?
I don't have a date yet. It'll be probably in October. We'll be sending out some PR around it. But ultimately, would love, if you want to get in touch, website is vero-technologies.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And, if anyone wants to, if there are founders out there that are keen to learn more about the story or looking for advice, more than happy to have a chat.
Legendary. Well, John, thanks again for jumping on, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Scaffold Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Russell.